Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. The August heat pressed against the gym windows that afternoon, making the air thick and suffocating. I had just finished my third tryout session for the school's varsity basketball team. Sweat fell in drops onto the shiny floor as Coach Garrett read the names out loud from his clipboard. When he said mine, everything changed. I was 16 years old, and there I was in my worn-out old Nikes, unable to believe I had actually been selected. My best friend, Jason, was waiting for me outside like always, sitting on the concrete steps, headphones on, nodding his head to whatever metal band he'd discovered that week. We'd been inseparable since elementary school, ever since his family moved to our neighborhood in central Ohio. His dad fixed cars and mine sold insurance, but something clicked between us right away. We were two kids who shared every free moment, building ramps for our bikes or staying up all night playing video games in his basement. When I pushed open the gym's double doors, Jason barely looked up. His expression already told me he knew. He had tried out 3 days, giving it everything, even though he was 5 centimeters shorter than most. His shot was good, better than mine, actually. But the coach was looking for height and speed for the season that was coming. I sat beside him on the steps still warm from the afternoon sun, trying to find the right words. Jason took off his headphones and forced a strange smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. He congratulated me in a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone else. That moment stayed etched in my memory, because it was the first crack in something I had believed was unbreakable. The following weeks brought changes I didn't see coming. Practices started immediately, 2 hours every morning before class and another 3 at the end of the day. My new teammates welcomed me enthusiastically, especially the captain, Bradley Turner, who everyone knew simply as BT. He drove a black Jeep Wrangler and had that natural ability to make anyone around him feel important. After practice, the guys would usually gather at his house, a huge property with a basement that had a pool table and a fridge always stocked with energy drinks. They invited me constantly, and every time I said yes, it meant turning Jason down. Our routines disappeared little by little. No more afternoon bike rides. No more video game marathons until sunrise. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that it would only be like this until I adjusted to the team's pace. But deep down, I knew I was choosing a different path. Jason started changing too, though at first I was too absorbed in my new life to notice. He got quieter, stopped waiting for me after school, and began dressing entirely in black. He started hanging out with guys I'd never seen before. His messages became short, sometimes just one word or strange symbols I didn't understand. One night I found him at the park where we used to play as kids. He was sitting at a picnic table, carving something into the wood with his pocket knife. I asked what he was doing there so late, but he just looked at me with an empty stare and said he was practicing. Practicing for what? He wouldn't tell me. I should have pushed, should have recognized the signs. But right then, BT texted me about a party at his place, and I made up an excuse to leave. By October, our friendship was barely a shadow of what it had been. Sometimes I'd see Jason in the school hallways, lingering near my locker or watching me from the other side of the cafeteria. At times, I'd catch him staring at BT with an intensity that made my chest tighten. He started leaving things in my locker, old photos of us from middle school, torn notebook pages filled with angry scribbles, and even once a dead sparrow wrapped in newspaper. The others on the team noticed too. They joked that I had a stalker friend, and I laughed along with them, pretending it didn't bother me. BT, however, didn't take it so lightly, especially after Jason showed up at 3 team events uninvited, always staying at the edge of the group, not talking to anyone, simply watching in silence. Everything exploded on a Thursday in November. Practice had run longer than usual because we were preparing for the first official game of the season. Coach made us run suicides over and over until our legs trembled like jelly. When we finally finished and headed to the showers, the sun had already gone down. I was the last one left in the locker room, in no rush because I knew my mom worked late and the house would be empty. While I was getting dressed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It contained only an address and the words, "He needs you. Come alone." I recognized the address instantly. An abandoned construction site on the edge of town, where 2 years earlier they had started building condos before the project collapsed into ruin because of bankruptcy. I felt a knot in my stomach as I read it a second time. The style of the message, the spaces between the words. I knew it was Jason, and that he was probably using a burner phone. Part of me wanted to ignore it, go home, and pretend I'd never seen it. But there was something in those 5 words that made my skin prickle, a sense of threat disguised as a plea. I drove out there in my old Toyota, the headlights cutting through the fog as I left the main streets behind. The place looked like a graveyard of broken dreams, half-built structures rising dark against the sky, piles of rusted rebar, and cement mixers frozen in time like prehistoric creatures. There were no other cars in sight. I killed the engine and sat there, listening to my own breathing, hesitating. Everything in my head screamed at me to leave, to call someone, even the police. But curiosity, and maybe a misplaced loyalty, pushed me to get out. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and went deeper into the site. The wind whistled through the concrete skeletons, dragging the smell of dampness, cement, and something like rot. The main structure loomed in front of me, 3 incomplete floors, with open gaps where the windows should have been. I moved carefully through the debris, shining my light on graffiti-covered walls and puddles of stagnant water. That's when I heard it. A low, irregular groan that didn't sound entirely human or entirely animal. A sound so disturbing it made every hair on my body stand up. I followed it to a makeshift staircase. The metal creaked under my weight as I climbed. On the 2nd floor, in what would have been the corner of an apartment, I saw him. BT was there, but not like usual. He was zip-tied to a support beam with industrial ties. His team jacket torn and stained with blood. Duct tape covered his mouth, and when he saw me, his eyes widened in panic. He shook his head desperately, trying to scream. Then Jason stepped out of the shadows behind a concrete column. I barely recognized him. His head was completely shaved, and under my flashlight I could make out symbols carved into his scalp. Marks that looked like letters, but weren't. He was dressed in black from head to toe, wearing gloves smeared with what I understood was BT's blood. In his right hand he held an iron bar, tapping it rhythmically against his leg. But the worst part was his smile, wide, genuine, like we were about to watch a movie, not live a nightmare. "I knew you'd come," he said in an almost cheerful tone. "True friends always show up." He stepped closer, and I could see his pupils were so dilated his eyes looked completely black. "We need to talk about loyalty, about what happens when people forget where they come from," he continued. I tried to keep my voice steady, appealing to whatever might still be left of my old friend. I begged him to let BT go, to talk, that I could help him, that I was sorry for everything. Jason laughed, but the sound was warped, like interference on a damaged radio. He walked over to BT and pressed the bar against his ribs, making him writhe in pain. "You think I'm sorry fixes anything?" he shouted. "You think I'm sorry brings back 8 years of friendship you threw away for this?" He shook the bar, pointing at BT. He doesn't even know your middle name. He doesn't know you're terrified of moths or that you still sleep with that stuffed dinosaur your dad gave you before he left. I know everything about you, and you replaced me with someone who barely sees you as a teammate. Suddenly, he lifted the bar and brought it down hard on BT's knee. Even with the tape over his mouth, the scream was unbearable. Jason turned to me, crying, tears mixing with the dried blood on his face. "But I'm going to fix it," he whispered. "After tonight, you'll never forget me." That's when I noticed it. A gas can in the corner. The smell of gasoline became unbearable. Jason followed my gaze and smiled, almost with childish pride. "Fire purifies," he said, lifting the can and pouring the fuel around BT. "It burns fake friendships, lies, everything. You're going to watch him burn, and then you'll understand what true loss means." My mind started moving at full speed, measuring distances, looking for an exit. Jason was absorbed in his ritual, murmuring words I couldn't make out. When he set the can down to pull out a lighter, I saw my chance. I ran at him and slammed into him with all my strength, smashing him into the concrete wall. We rolled across the floor through puddles of gasoline, throwing desperate punches. Jason was stronger than I remembered, driven by some substance pumping through his veins. But I had the advantage of fear and adrenaline. I finally managed to pin him down, holding his arms against the ground. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. They found us like that, me on top of him, trying to hold him down, while Jason screamed about betrayal and blood pacts. BT was still tied up, but alive. The whole place reeked of gasoline. It turned out BT had managed to trigger the emergency signal on his smartwatch before Jason took his phone. Because of that, the police arrived in time. As they took him away, Jason kept yelling about purification, betrayal, and true friendship, as if he were still trapped inside his delusion. They transferred him to a psychiatric institution, where he has remained for the last 2 years. Doctors said he suffered a severe psychotic break, triggered by rejection and accumulated loneliness. I quit the basketball team the following week. I couldn't stand going back to that gym, not even passing near it. BT recovered physically, but between us it was never the same again. We barely spoke after that night. There was something in his eyes, a mix of fear and guilt, that made it impossible to pretend everything was fine. Sometimes I drive past the old construction site. Today it's a new condo complex, full of young families walking with their kids or taking their dogs through the gardens. I always wonder if they ever feel the weight of what almost happened there. If the air holds, even a little, the memory of the horror. I still have nightmares about Jason's face that night, his twisted smile, his completely black eyes, that look of someone who wasn't him anymore. And what torments me most isn't the fear, it's the guilt. Because deep down I know I helped break him. I turned my back on him when he most needed someone to listen, all because I was chasing something I thought mattered. I learned that success isn't worth it if it means losing yourself, and even less if it means pushing away the people who knew you before you ever thought you were someone special. Story 2. The fog that morning was like nothing I had ever seen in my 23 years living in Oregon. I work as a night shift nurse at Providence Medical Center, and my routine is sacred. Finish my 12-hour shift at exactly 6, drive home, put on my running clothes, and get on the trail before 6:30. But that early November morning, I could barely make out my own car in the hospital parking lot. The fog was so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself, wrapping everything in a silence so strange that even the echo of my footsteps on the asphalt sounded distorted. Still, I'm stubborn. Running is how I release all the stress I build up after a night of emergencies. and I wasn't going to let the weather interfere with my routine. I lived in a quiet neighborhood called Riverside Heights, about 15 minutes from the hospital. The area had beautiful running trails that wound between patches of forest and connected to a larger park system. My apartment was in one of those restored old Victorian houses, and I remember being on the porch that morning, tightening my shoelaces while a gray wall of fog covered the world. Mrs. Enuan, my neighbor, was stepping out to bring her cat inside and called to me from her doorway, asking if I really planned to run in that soup. I laughed and told her I'd stick to the main paths. Visibility was maybe 3 meters at best, but it reassured me that I knew those trails like the back of my hand. I'd been running them every morning without fail for 3 years. The first quarter mile went smoothly. I stayed on the sidewalk, passing familiar places. The blue mailbox on the corner, the house with the ridiculous collection of garden gnomes, the bus stop where teenagers always left their empty energy drink cans. But when I reached the trail entrance, everything changed. The fog there seemed even thicker, as if it were rising straight out of the forest. I had to slow down because with every step I nearly tripped over roots and stones I couldn't see until they were under my feet. The most unsettling part was how the air seemed to smother every sound. My breathing sounded loud and far away at the same time, as if I were listening to someone else running. Not even the birds were singing. And now I know that should have been my first real warning. About 10 minutes in, I reached the point where the trail splits. To the left, the path goes deeper into the woods and leads to the creek. To the right, it stays closer to the neighborhood. I always took the left path. It was more demanding, with decent hills and a long straight stretch along the water that I loved. But that time, when I reached the fork, I felt a strange inner resistance. It wasn't exactly fear, but a kind of pressure in my chest, like my body was trying to warn me about something my mind didn't understand yet. I stood there for about 30 seconds, watching my breath form little clouds that vanished immediately into the gray sea around me. Finally, I shook my head, laughing at my own paranoia, and turned left, picking up my pace to make up for the lost time. The deeper I went into the woods, the more the world around me shrank. I couldn't see the trees until I was practically on top of them, suddenly appearing like dark columns out of nowhere. The trail, which I knew was about 2 meters wide, now felt like a narrow tunnel. Every so often I had to reach out and touch the bark of the trees so I wouldn't lose my sense of direction. But the texture felt strange, too soft, almost spongy under my fingers. The fog also warped my sense of distance. I thought I was close to the wooden bridge that crossed the creek. But I ran another minute and still didn't see it. When I finally reached it, the sound of my footsteps on the boards was flat, muffled, without the hollow echo it normally made and that I loved so much. That's when I heard it, a hummed melody. At first it was barely perceptible, confused with the murmur of the creek, but it was definitely human. A woman's voice, carrying a slow, erratic tune, like she was trying to remember a forgotten song. Every time it seemed to continue, it stopped and started over. I slowed to a stop. My heart was pounding, not from the run, but from an inexplicable tension. The sound was coming from somewhere ahead, though in that fog it was impossible to judge distance. It could have been 6 meters, or 60. "Hello?" I called, my voice thin. The humming cut off instantly. The silence that followed was so complete my ears rang, and then I heard them. Footsteps. Slow, uneven, as if someone were dragging one foot while walking. They were coming closer. Suddenly a figure emerged from the fog, and what I saw froze my blood. The first thing I noticed was her long dark hair, tangled and coated with something that looked like mud, or maybe something worse. She was wearing a white nightgown, torn at one shoulder and stained with dark patches. She was barefoot, which explained the dragging sound of her steps. Her left foot left a trail of blood on the path with every movement, but it was her face that made me step back without thinking. Her eyes were wide open, her pupils so dilated they looked completely black. Her expression was pure disorientation, as if she didn't understand where she was. Her lips moved, murmuring words I couldn't make out, and in her right hand, oh God, her right hand was clenched tightly around something dark and wet. "Are you okay?" I managed to ask, though my voice was barely a whisper. She tilted her head when she heard me, and for an instant, her eyes seemed to focus on me. Then she smiled, an empty smile, devoid of emotion, so chilling it made me step back again. She raised her clenched hand and, with an unsettling calm, said, "I found it." "What did you find?" I asked without thinking. "He hid it from me, but I found it." She slowly opened her fist, and what I saw made the air catch in my throat. In her hand, she was holding a human finger. It still had a gold wedding ring on it, and the end of the bone was torn and wet. The nail was painted bright red, though chipped at the tip. I must have made some sound, a gasp, a whimper. I don't know, because the woman looked at her own hand in surprise, as if she had just remembered what she was holding. "Oh," she murmured in a shaky voice, "this isn't mine." Every cell in my body wanted to run, but my nurse reflexes took over. That woman was in crisis, maybe a psychotic episode or a medical emergency. The blood on her feet, her dilated pupils, that total disconnection from reality. She needed help. I took a deep breath and spoke slowly, trying to sound calm. "I'm a nurse," I told her. "You're hurt. Let me help you, please." She blinked slowly, as if processing the words from a very distant place. Then she took a step toward me, still holding the bloody finger. "He didn't want to tell me where he put them," she said in a nearly conversational tone. "So I had to look everywhere, under the floorboards, inside the walls, but this one was in his pocket the whole time. Can you believe it?" She let out a high, fragile laugh, like the sound of glass cracking. That's when I noticed her other hand. It was bleeding too, the nails broken and coated with white dust, as if she'd been scratching at drywall or cement. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 without taking my eyes off her. The fog seemed to close in even tighter around us, and suddenly I realized I no longer knew which direction the main path was. She stood between me and the exit, swaying from side to side like she might collapse. "What's your name?" I asked him, trying to buy time as the phone rang. She frowned, confused. "I used to know," she replied after a pause. "But he took that too. He takes everything." The operator picked up just as the woman lunged toward me, reaching out with her bloody hands. I stumbled backward, almost dropping the phone. And then I heard it. Sirens. Several of them, far away but getting closer. She heard them too. Her whole body tensed, and her expression shifted from confusion to pure panic. She looked around like a trapped animal and whispered, "They're coming for me. They always come for me." Before I could react, she turned and ran, or tried to, vanishing into the fog with that uneven gait, dragging her injured foot. I stood there frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, while the operator asked me questions I barely understood. Maybe only seconds passed, though it felt like hours, until I managed to stammer my location and explain that there was an injured woman who needed urgent help. The operator told me to stay where I was, that officers were already in the area responding to another incident. I leaned my back against a large tree and scanned the fog for any movement. The sirens got closer and closer, and through the gray veil I began to see flashes of red and blue filtering between the trunks. About 5 minutes later, 2 police officers appeared through the fog, their flashlights cutting the darkness like blades of light. Their faces were tense, hands near their holsters. When they saw me, just a woman in athletic clothes, shaking and drenched in sweat, they relaxed a little. "Ma'am, did you see a woman come through here?" one of them asked in a firm voice. I nodded, trying to explain, but he cut me off immediately. "Which direction did she go?" I pointed down the trail where I'd seen her disappear. Both of them took off running without wasting a second, talking to each other over the radio. A third officer stayed with me and walked me back to the main path. At the end of the trail, there were several patrol cars and an ambulance, their flashing lights painting the fog red and blue. It was there, as I tried to catch my breath, that they told me the truth. The woman's name was Diane Holbrook. She had been reported missing 3 days earlier from a psychiatric hospital after attacking a staff member. But that wasn't the worst part. About an hour before I ran into her, her husband had called 911 from his home, about 3 kilometers away. He said Diane had shown up in the middle of the night, furious, trying to get inside. He had been arranging for her involuntary commitment, which apparently triggered her escape from the facility. When he refused to let her in, she broke a window and attacked him with a kitchen knife. The man lost 3 fingers trying to defend himself before he managed to lock himself in the bathroom. She fled as soon as she heard the sirens. They found her about an hour later, hypothermic and catatonic, curled up under the same wooden bridge I had crossed. The finger she had in her hand, the same one she showed me with that empty smile, was her husband's index finger. He survived, thankfully, though he needed several reconstructive surgeries. As for me, I took a week off from my morning runs, and when I finally returned to the trails, I swore I would never run alone or in the fog again. Sometimes, on misty mornings, when the air thickens again over the trees, I think I hear a faint humming in the distance, almost imperceptible. And every time it happens, I don't hesitate. I turn around and go straight home. Story 3. I need to tell someone what happened that night in June 2018. Back then, I lived in Sacramento, barely surviving, doing things I'm not proud of. I stole wallets, broke into cars, anything that kept the lights on. My mother got sick that spring, and between medical treatments and my own rent, honest work just wasn't enough. I had started casing houses in Willowbrook, a pristine neighborhood where people left their garage doors open and Amazon packages on their porches all day long. One house in particular, on Maple Street, caught my attention. A 2-story place, modest but set back, with overgrown hedges that gave it privacy. The owner was a paramedic named Christopher Walsh. I'd watched him enough to know his routine. 4 days on, 3 off. Always left for work at exactly 5:30 p.m., wearing his Navy uniform with his medical bag over his shoulder. That Thursday night, I knew Walsh would be gone until the next morning. I watched him leave, punctual as a clock, climbing into his Ford Explorer. The house went completely dark, except for the porch light. The nearest neighbor was separated by a line of thick evergreen trees. I remember sitting in my old Corolla, parked a few houses down, watching the clock as I counted the hours to midnight. I kept telling myself it would be my last job. Just grab a few electronics, maybe some jewelry, sell everything before the weekend. Quick and clean. I'd done it dozens of times, but something about that house made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way the windows seemed to watch the street, or how the shadows in the yard felt thicker than normal. Still, I shoved those feelings to the back of my mind. I needed the money, and Walsh wouldn't be back for hours. Getting in was easier than I expected. The back door had an old pin tumbler lock, the kind I could pick almost with my eyes closed. There was no alarm system. Strange for a neighborhood like that. I came in through the kitchen. using a small flashlight to move between granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that probably cost more than my car. The smell caught my attention. Not unpleasant, but peculiar. A mix of hospital and something sweet, metallic. In the living room, I started filling my backpack with the usual: a tablet on the coffee table, some antique watches from a display case, a little jewelry box from the mantel shelf. The silence was absolute, so deep I could hear my own heart. And that's when I noticed it. A door on the back wall. The same beige color as everything else, almost invisible, except for one detail: a thick security bolt installed on the outside. Not to keep someone out, but to keep something in. I should have left right then. I should have taken what I had and vanished. But greed won. I figured maybe he kept a safe in there, or some valuable collection. The bolt was new, but the wood was old, softened. 5 minutes with my crowbar was enough to break it. The smell hit me instantly, that same clinical scent, but stronger, mixed with something organic and rotten. A wooden staircase led down into the darkness, and from below I heard a constant hum, like an old refrigerator. Every step creaked under my weight as I went down, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The basement was finished with drywall and had fluorescent tubes I didn't dare turn on. The hum grew louder as I moved forward, joined by other sounds. Dripping, a faint electrical crackle, and something else, something rhythmic, like breathing. But it wasn't. The smell was unbearable down there, making my eyes water and burning my throat. I covered my nose with my shirt and moved along a narrow hallway that stretched deeper into the house. On both sides were metal shelves. When I swept my flashlight over them, I saw glass jars, dozens, maybe hundreds, all lined up. Inside were cloudy liquids with things floating in them. At first I thought they were medical samples. Walsh was a paramedic, after all. But then I saw the labels, handwritten in neat, careful script. Melissa, 2016. Third finger. Catherine, 2017. Left ear. My mind refused to understand it. The hallway opened into a larger room, and that's where I saw her. She was a girl, no more than 19 or 20. She was zip-tied to a medical gurney in the center of the room. Duct tape covered her mouth and her eyes were wide, reflecting pure terror when my flashlight beam lit up her face. She was wearing a torn college hoodie, Cal State Sacramento, and she was missing one shoe. Around her was medical equipment I only recognized from movies. IV stands, rolling tables with surgical instruments, and powerful exam lamps mounted on articulated arms. But this was not a hospital. The concrete floor had dark stains spreading out from a drain in the center, and the walls were covered with instant photos, hundreds of them, showing women in different stages of... I didn't want to look any longer. The girl started struggling when she saw me, making muffled sounds behind the tape, tears running down her cheeks. I lunged toward her, cutting the zip ties with my pocket knife while whispering for her to stay calm, to stay quiet, even as my own instincts screamed that we had to run. Her wrists were raw, with dried blood marks from all the fighting. When I managed to peel the tape off, she let out a broken, shaky breath. "He's coming back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He always comes back during his break to check on me. Please, we have to go. Now." I hadn't even freed her legs when we heard a door slam upstairs, the metallic, heavy sound of a door closing. Then footsteps. Steady. Slow. Across the floor of the main level. The girl's body went rigid as a board. "Hide," she said in a threat of a voice. "If he finds you here." The front door opened, and a familiar humming drifted down from above. A tuneless, off-key melody that made my blood turn cold. Walsh. His steps moved with confidence as he walked through the house. They stopped for a moment. I knew he'd noticed the forced basement door. The change in the air was immediate. The humming stopped, replaced by an absolute silence, so thick I could hear the girl's trembling breath. Then his voice carried down to us, calm, almost conversational. "Amber, I know you've been trying to get loose again. You know what happens when I have to come down." The girl, Amber, gripped my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. I looked around desperately for another way out, but there was only the staircase. We were trapped. I dragged her behind one of the metal shelves, pressing us flat against the wall. The footsteps started coming down, and every creak of the stairs made my heart pound in my throat. "How strange," Walsh said, his voice closer with every word. "I could have sworn I locked this door. Have you been making friends, Amber?" His tone was almost playful, like he was enjoying the fear. The shadow of his body appeared on the floor, stretching between the shelves. Walsh wasn't as tall as I'd imagined, but he was solid, with the kind of build you get from lifting bodies day after day. He walked slowly between the jars, brushing his fingers across the lids as if admiring a wine collection. "You know, Amber," he continued, "I've been thinking about you all night. I had a cardiac arrest this afternoon, an elderly woman. She didn't make it. Her family was so grateful for my efforts. They have no idea death follows me home." He let out a low, dry laugh that turned my stomach. Amber trembled beside me, breathing so fast I was afraid he'd hear her. Then, suddenly, a sound cut through the air. His radio. A crackle followed by a static voice. "Unit 47, we need backup. Multi-vehicle accident on Highway 50. Full staff required immediately." Walsh stopped. I watched him reach for the radio on his belt. For a few seconds he didn't move. Then he exhaled heavily and answered. "Unit 47, on my way. I'll be there in 15 minutes. For a moment I thought he knew we were there, that he would play with us before leaving. But finally he turned toward the stairs. "Don't go anywhere, Amber," he said casually. "We'll continue our session when I get back. This accident looks complicated. I might be a couple of hours." He went up the steps calmly, and a moment later we heard the door close. The click of the bolt sounded like a gunshot. We were locked in. Amber collapsed against me, sobbing. "He always locks it," she said through tears. "Even if he leaves, he always locks it. There's no way out." But I wasn't going to give up. Not after what we'd just seen. I wasn't going to stay down there waiting for that monster to come back. I helped Amber stand. Her legs were shaking, but adrenaline kept her upright. I finished cutting the remaining ties holding her to the gurney and started searching desperately for another exit. There had to be something, anything. That's when, behind one of the photo-covered walls, I saw a small window, almost hidden. It was painted over on the inside, sealed, but it was still an exit. It was narrow, maybe 40 to 45 centimeters wide. But Amber was thin. Maybe she could fit. I dragged the gurney underneath and climbed onto it to reach the window. I used my crowbar to break through the dried paint and pry the frame until it gave way. A rush of fresh air came in immediately, bringing the smell of wet grass. I could see we were at ground level, on the side of the house. "You first," I told her, lacing my hands together to make a step. Amber looked at me, face dirty, eyes full of fear. "What about you?" she asked in a thin voice. I knew I wouldn't fit. My shoulders were too broad. There was no way. "Just go," I insisted. "Get to the nearest house. Call 911. Tell them everything." She hesitated for only a second, then nodded. With what little strength she had left, she pushed herself and slid through the opening. I helped by shoving from below until she disappeared on the other side. I heard the soft thud of her landing on the grass and then silence. I dropped back to the floor and ran through the basement, past the filthy jars and their carefully written labels. I took the stairs 2 at a time and slammed my shoulder into the door again and again until the wooden frame finally splintered and gave. I stumbled out into the night air, breathing like it was the first time. Amber was waiting beside my old Corolla, shaking, but alive. We got in and pulled away without looking back, straight to the nearest police station. We didn't speak the whole drive. Only the engine and our pounding hearts filled the silence. The next hours were a blur of lights, questioning, and paperwork. We told them everything, every detail. Officers immediately sent patrols to Walsh's house, but he never came back. They discovered that during his shift, he had been listening to police frequencies in his ambulance and heard when officers reported his address. He abandoned the vehicle 3 counties away and disappeared. The basement investigation confirmed what we feared, evidence linking him to 14 women who had gone missing over the last 8 years. 14 lives. The news dubbed him the paramedic of death. They never caught him. Walsh is still on the run, somewhere. Sometimes I think maybe he changed his name, that now he works in another city, saving lives by day and taking them by night. Amber was placed in witness protection after testifying before the grand jury. I, on the other hand, served 6 months in prison for theft, though the prosecutor offered me a deal given the circumstances. Today I'm clean. I work construction, live quietly, try to stay away from trouble, but some nights I wake up sweating, with the memory of those jars floating in the dim light, the photographs on the walls, the metallic smell in the air. And in those moments, I can't help but wonder, where is Christopher Walsh now? And who is he helping or hunting this time? Story 4. Thursday nights at the supermarket were my time. After putting my 3-year-old daughter, Chloe, to bed, I'd leave her with my husband, Nathan, and go do the weekly groceries in peace. It was November 2022, and we had just moved to a small town in Colorado for Nathan's new job at the power plant. Life was going well. We had a little ranch-style house with a big backyard. Chloe was happy at her new preschool, and I had even started making friends in the local moms group. That Thursday started like any other. I kissed Nathan around 8:30, grabbed my reusable bags, and drove out to Save Mart on the edge of town. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few cars scattered under those harsh yellow lights that make everything look sickly. I remember feeling satisfied as I loaded the bags into my old Ford Explorer. I'd gotten everything on the list, even a few deals on Chloe's favorite yogurt. The temperature had dropped while I was inside, probably around 0 degrees, and I could see my breath forming in the air. I turned the key, and the engine made a horrible sound, like metal scraping against metal. Then nothing. Just that relentless clicking that tells you something is very wrong. I tried again, pumping the gas even though Nathan always told me that doesn't work in modern cars. Click, click, click. I checked the time on my phone. 9:47 p.m. The store closed at 10, and almost all the employees had already left. Through the windows, I saw the night manager turning off the lights. I picked up my phone to call Nathan, but remembered he'd mentioned he was taking a sleeping pill early that night. Ever since he started working night shifts, he struggled to adjust. And when he slept with medication, nothing woke him. I thought about calling AAA, but we'd let our membership lapse during the move. Stupid, I know. I scrolled through my contacts looking for someone in town who could help, but the moms I knew lived on the other side of town, about 20 minutes away. I was weighing my options when I heard footsteps on the asphalt. A man was approaching from the dumpster area at the back of the parking lot. He wore dark work clothes with reflective strips on the sleeves and carried what looked like a toolbox. "Car trouble," he called out, in a friendly voice, the kind that makes you drop your guard without even thinking. He was a guy in his mid-40s, average height, with one of those faces that immediately inspires trust. Little league dad face, as my mother would say. "Yeah, it won't start," I answered, rolling the window down only halfway. He smiled, in that warm way that wrinkles the whole face. He wore a cap with an embroidered logo that said something like Morrison Auto Repair, though in the dim light I wasn't sure that's exactly what it said. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked as he was already walking toward the front of my car. "I'm coming off a late call, but I've got a couple of minutes. I hate seeing anyone stranded out here at this hour." He set the toolbox down with an ease that showed practice. His hands were clean, though with that dark grime embedded under the nails that doesn't come out even with industrial soap. Everything about the way he moved had an almost choreographed precision, like he'd done exactly this 1,000 times before. And looking back, that should have been my first real warning. Not the gesture itself, but how perfectly rehearsed it all looked. I popped the hood, and he propped it open with the support rod in one quick, natural motion. He leaned over the engine, flashlight in hand, and his posture looked completely professional. "When was the last time you had the battery checked?" he asked, his voice muffled by the hood. I told him probably when we bought the car 3 years ago. He clicked his tongue sympathetically. "Cold is lethal for batteries, especially in these newer models with so much electronics." He checked for a few minutes, occasionally asking me to turn the key so he could listen. Every time, the same result, that metallic grind followed by clicking. But something felt strange. He never actually touched anything. His hands hovered over the engine, and the flashlight beam moved from place to place, but he didn't make contact with a single part, like he was acting, faking a diagnosis. Finally, he straightened up and wiped his hands with a rag from his pocket. "I'll tell you what I can do," he said. "I've got jumper cables in my truck. It's parked just around the corner. Didn't want to take up customer spots. You know, give me 2 minutes." He held my gaze. It was a strange kind of eye contact, direct but empty, like he was looking through me, not really at me. Before I could respond, he was already walking away, the toolbox swinging at his side. That's when something made my chest tighten. As the supposed mechanic walked off, I noticed his boots were leaving wet prints on the asphalt. The problem was, it hadn't rained in days. The parking lot was completely dry, except for those dark marks heading toward the dumpsters, the same place he'd come from. A chill ran down my spine. I checked the time, 9:56 p.m. Almost all the supermarket lights were off now, with only the security lighting left. In my side mirror, I saw the night manager lock the main doors. The parking lot was empty. I felt a sudden need to call someone, anyone, while that man was away. I remembered that the month before we'd taken the Explorer to Eddie's Auto Service for an oil change. They had a 24-hour emergency line. I looked up the number and called. It rang 3 times before a raspy voice answered. "Eddie's Auto, Frank speaking." I explained my situation quickly, mentioning the nice mechanic who had offered to help me. There was a brief silence on the other end. "What mechanic?" he asked, suddenly serious. "We don't have anyone out there tonight. All our guys left at 6. My stomach went cold. "But he had a cap with the shop name," I stammered. "Morrison or something. I'm not sure." Another pause. "Ma'am," Frank said, firm now. "Where exactly are you?" I gave him the address, and his response froze me. "Lock your doors right now." We're getting reports of a man pretending to be a mechanic at night. I'm calling the police and I'm sending our real emergency tech. His name is Carl. He drives a white van with the Eddie's Auto Service logo. Don't get out of the car for anything or anyone." The call ended in shaking. I hit the locks on all the doors. The sound of them clicking shut echoed like a gunshot inside the silent car. That was when I saw him again in the rearview mirror. He was coming back, with no truck behind him, no jumper cables, just him, walking with that same measured stride, with that empty smile that now looked more forced, more tense. But this time he was coming from a different direction, not from where he'd said his truck was, but from the dark area behind the supermarket where the delivery trucks unloaded. My heart started pounding in my ears. He came up to my window and tapped lightly, tilting his head when he saw it was fully rolled up. "Small problem," he said, his voice muffled through the glass. "I forgot my keys inside your engine. I just need to grab them real quick." Keys. He had never put anything in my engine. I shook my head, not daring to speak. His smile slipped for just a moment, and in that brief instant his face changed completely. The friendly air vanished, replaced by a blank, predatory expression. "Come on," he said. Still friendly, but with a dangerous edge. "Just pop the hood. 2 seconds." He pressed his hand against my window, leaving a greasy mark. But when I looked closer, it wasn't grease. It was dirt, packed under his nails, like he'd been digging. With his other hand, he started tapping his fingers against his toolbox, an irregular and nervous drumming that made my skin crawl. Through the glass I could hear his breathing, short, forced, eager. "I'm waiting for AAA, I lied, trying to sound calm. "They'll be here any minute." His smile tightened. He pressed harder against the glass, leaving a blurred print. "That's funny," he said with icy calm. "I've been watching this parking lot for the last hour, and nobody's shown up." That's when I noticed something else. A small earpiece in his right ear, barely visible, with a thin wire disappearing under his collar. Who was he talking to? Or worse, who was talking to him? Suddenly, a sound broke the air, sirens in the distance. Not police sirens, more like a nearby car or alarm, but enough to make him step back a few paces. He looked toward the main road, then back at me. His face changed again, now filled with contained rage, like a predator losing its prey. "You got lucky," he murmured, almost inaudible through the glass. Then, louder, slipping back into his fake friendly tone. "Looks like your help is here, huh?" He picked up his toolbox, but this time he held it differently, like it was a weapon, not a tool. He backed away slowly toward a dark sedan parked 3 spaces from mine, one I hadn't noticed before. When he opened the door, the interior light flashed on for a second and revealed a shadow in the passenger seat. Someone else watching. The man threw the box into the back seat and slammed the door, but the engine didn't start. They just sat there, waiting. Only a few seconds passed, though it felt endless. The air inside my car was so still I could hear my heartbeat bouncing against my ribs. My hand stayed locked on the steering wheel, ready to hit the horn or drive off if I had to. Then, in the distance, I saw headlights coming fast. It was a white van with the Eddie's Auto Service logo painted on the sides. Behind it, 2 police cruisers with their lights flashing. The dark sedan reacted immediately. Its engine roared and it shot toward the parking lot exit. But the police were already there waiting. One cruiser blocked the exit and the other swung hard to intercept them. The sound of tires screeching across the asphalt cut the silence like a scream. It all happened in less than 30 seconds, but it felt like forever. The shop driver, a stocky man in his 50s with a worried expression, jumped out of the van and ran to me, holding up his ID. "I'm Carl from Eddie's Auto Service. Frank sent me," he said, raising the badge in front of my windshield. "Are you okay, ma'am?" I nodded, though I couldn't stop trembling. Only when I saw him up close and noticed the real logo embroidered on his uniform did I dare unlock the door. "Frank told me to get here fast," Carl continued. "That was him, right? The guy they've been warning about around here." I couldn't answer. I only managed to nod again. Carl walked around the vehicle, speaking in a calm tone, explaining every movement so I wouldn't panic. "I'm going to check the engine, okay? Just to make sure he didn't do anything weird." He opened the hood, and his face changed instantly. The flashlight slipped from his hand. "Jesus," he murmured, stepping back. "Ma'am, get out of the car. Now." I obeyed without asking, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. What Carl found under the hood still haunts me. Between the battery and the engine block was a hunting knife, wedged carefully, pointed toward the fan. If the car had started, the belt would have snapped the handle and launched the blade like a projectile straight toward the interior. But that wasn't the worst part. Next to the knife was a small electronic device with wires running into the brake system. Later, the officers explained it was a homemade trap designed to puncture the brake lines after a certain number of presses. If my car had started and I'd left the parking lot, I would have lost my brakes in less than a kilometer. The police managed to stop the sedan before it got away. Inside, they found plastic zip ties, rope, a tarp, and 3 different license plates. The man posing as a mechanic turned out to be named Douglas Hartley, wanted in 3 states for attempted kidnapping. His companion, the one in the passenger seat, was never identified. He used a fake name and had no records in any database. Both of them had been watching the Save Mart for weeks, waiting for women alone with cars that just happened not to start. According to police, they used a device capable of remotely disabling certain car models. They only needed the victim to open the hood. That night, I was their next target. Carl reconnected a loose battery cable in seconds. Police believe Hartley had loosened it while I was shopping. The whole plan depended on me trusting his smile and popping the hood one more time. I drove home in shock, not even remembering the trip. I hugged Chloe so tightly she woke up frightened, and Nathan and I spent the rest of the night sitting in the kitchen, hardly able to talk. We installed security cameras the next day, and I never grocery shopped at night again. But more than anything, I think about that moment when I almost popped the hood again, about how a decision that simple, one phone call, saved my life. Sometimes the smallest choices are the ones that make the difference between getting home or never getting home at all. Story 5. That Friday night in October 2017 started like any other at Michigan State University. I had finished my shift at the campus library and was heading to my roommate's birthday, a party that started right at midnight. The apartment was packed with people from our communications program. Red cups everywhere, music so loud it made the windows shake, and that constant buzz of laughter, conversations, and shouts typical of a college night. I stuck with water. I had to drive back later, and just chatted with a few classmates I hadn't seen all week. The atmosphere was loaded with that chaotic, youthful energy that only exists at college parties. People talking too loud, laughing at anything, someone trying to start a drinking game in the corner. By 2 a.m, the crowd started to thin out. Groups of friends called their taxis or started walking back to the dorms. I figured it was time to do the same, head back to my off-campus apartment. That's when I saw him, Brian Lawson, leaning against the kitchen counter. We shared a media ethics class, but we'd barely exchanged a dozen words all semester. He was slowly sliding down the wall and then pushing himself upright again, eyes glassy, mumbling that he had to get home. His friends were already gone. I'd watched them climb into a car an hour earlier. The guy was completely wasted, way past the fun point, closer to collapse than anything else. He was trying to type something on his phone, but he could barely unlock it, jabbing at the screen with clumsy fingers. I asked if he had a ride secured, a friend coming to get him, and he just shook his head before gripping the counter again. Dizzy. I should have left. Everything about the scene screamed a bad idea. A guy I barely knew, drunk to the point of losing coordination, needing help at 2 a.m. But I stood there watching him sway, thinking about how dangerous it would be if he tried to walk home alone. There had been several nighttime assaults near campus lately, and he lived on the south side of the city, several kilometers away. Plus, the temperature had dropped to around 4 degrees, and he was wearing only a t-shirt. I don't know why, but I started thinking about my younger brother, who had just started college, and I imagined someone finding him like that. And before I knew it, I heard myself offering to drive Brian home. Brian's face lit up with a messy, grateful smile, repeating thank you over and over through slurred words. Getting him out of the party was an ordeal. He insisted he could walk fine, but on his first step he tripped on the door frame. I had to hold him by the shoulder and get him down the building's 3 stairs while he rambled about a girl named Ashley who, according to him, had been ignoring him all night. His breath reeked of cheap vodka and stale beer, that signature party smell that turns your stomach. In the parking lot, he suddenly pulled away from me and started patting his pockets in desperation, saying he'd lost his wallet. We spent 10 minutes searching under cars with my phone flashlight until he remembered he'd left it in his dorm. The whole time, a strange feeling started crawling up my back. It wasn't exactly fear, but a persistent unease. A bad feeling I couldn't shake. When I finally got him settled into my old Toyota Corolla, Brian seemed to sober up all at once. He turned on the radio, flipping stations every few seconds, and then suddenly got serious. He asked if we could make a quick stop. He needed to buy cigarettes and a Red Bull for the morning, he said. There was a 24-hour gas station on the way to his place. I just wanted to drop him off and go back to sleep, but he insisted. He even offered to pay me gas money for the trouble. Something in his tone changed in that moment. His voice became more focused, more calculating, like all the drunkenness had evaporated. And as I followed his directions, I noticed we were moving farther away from campus, away from familiar neighborhoods, deeper into an industrial area I'd never seen before. Each turn took us farther from any sign of life. The streetlights grew fewer, the buildings more abandoned, the roads emptier. 20 minutes later, we reached a ruined gas station, one of those places that looks frozen in the 80s. A flickering neon sign with half the letters burned out, and only 2 old pumps out front. There were no other businesses around, just dark fields and a chain-link fence circling what looked like an empty warehouse across the road. That's when I realized it. Brian didn't look drunk anymore. He was completely sober, back straight, staring at the store entrance with unsettling focus. "Park on the side and where the cameras can't see you," he said. That should have been enough for me to turn around and run, but before I could say anything, he was already getting out of the car, moving with a confidence he hadn't had an hour earlier. He turned back toward me, and the expression on his face froze my chest. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Inside my head, every alarm was going off at once. Every part of me screamed that I should leave, start the engine, and run. But Brian was standing by the passenger door, watching me with an expression that left no room to choose. Somehow, I knew that if I tried to escape, something worse would happen. I shut off the engine with numb fingers and followed him toward the gas station. The glass doors were so filthy I could barely see inside, but I could make out a single employee behind the counter. An older man, maybe around 60, watching a small TV mounted on the wall. As we walked toward the entrance, Brian pulled something from his jacket, and my knees nearly buckled when I saw the dark gleam of a gun. He'd had the weapon on him the whole time, at the party, in my car, and I hadn't even noticed. "Stay calm," he said quietly, not looking at me. "Nobody gets hurt if you do what I tell you. You're going to buy some things while I handle the rest. Act normal." My mind went blank. I couldn't process it. I should have been asleep in my bed, not walking into an armed robbery at 3 a.m. with a classmate I barely knew. The electronic chime rang when we entered, but in my head it sounded like a funeral bell. The cashier glanced up for a second and then went back to his TV, an old Western. Brian walked calmly toward the back of the store while I stood frozen near the door, pretending to look at Candy. In the reflection of the glass, I saw a face I barely recognized, pale, eyes too wide, jaw clenched. He moved like any customer, grabbing a bag of chips, an energy drink, a couple of other items, but his right hand never left his jacket pocket. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the air, and one of them flickered on and off, making everything look like a broken film. The cashier coughed and shifted on his stool, unaware his night shift was seconds away from turning into a nightmare. I wanted to yell for him to run, to warn him, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like my muscles didn't belong to me anymore. Brian approached the counter with the items. Everything happened in slow motion. He set the things down, waited for the cashier to start scanning them, and then he pulled the gun. "Empty the register. No alarms. No heroes," he said in a voice so cold it didn't sound human. The man's face turned ashen. He raised his hands on reflex, but Brian corrected him. "No, put your hands down. Just do it." The sound of the cash drawer opening echoed like thunder. Bills began stacking up on the counter. 20s, 10s, 5s, 1s. Brian shot me a look and jerked his head toward the door. "Go to the car," he ordered in a tense whisper. "Start it. Now." But I couldn't move. My feet felt welded to the linoleum. The cashier looked at me for a second, and in his eyes I saw my own panic reflected back. I thought about his family, about how many years he'd probably spent working shifts like this just to survive, and how I, through sheer stupidity, had dragged him into this. "I told you to go," Brian shouted, and that shout snapped the paralysis. I stumbled backward, knocking over a rack of chip bags that crashed down with a deafening noise. The sound of crinkling plastic was the last thing I heard before I burst out into the cold. The freezing air hit my face and gave me my breath back. My hands were sweating so badly the keys kept slipping, and it took several tries to get them into the ignition. The engine started on the third attempt. I sat there shaking, hands on the wheel, staring at the store door. Part of me wanted to slam the gas and disappear, leave him there and pretend it never happened. But I knew he had my university ID. He'd taken it while we were searching for his wallet. He knew my name, my college, and he could probably figure out where I lived. And besides, if I left, the cashier would be alone with him. Through the windshield I saw movement. Brian backing toward the exit, the gun still in his hand, the plastic bag swollen with cash. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds pulled long, as if the world had stopped turning. Then the door flew open and Brian dove into the passenger seat and shouting, "Drive, drive, drive." I threw it into gear and peeled out of the lot, tires squealing on damp pavement. The car surged onto the empty road, headlights cutting the darkness like blades. Brian was laughing and shouting directions while I could barely breathe. The speedometer climbed past 80 kilometers per hour, and the roar of the engine mixed with the deafening thud of my heart. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him open the plastic bag, counting bills with trembling hands, eyes shining with euphoria. $3,000, maybe more, he laughed. Easiest score of my life. He tried to shove a handful of the money into the cup holder. "You're cut," he said, grinning. I smacked his hand away. "I don't want any of that," I told him. "I just want to go home." That seemed to entertain him even more. He let out a rough, adrenaline-loaded laugh. "Too late, college boy," he said. "You're in this now." We kept driving for what felt like forever. Empty streets, abandoned warehouses, silence broken only by wind rattling the windshield. Finally, he told me to stop in front of an apartment complex I didn't recognize. He put his hand on my shoulder before getting out. The gun barrel peeked from his waistband, visible only to me. "You did good," he said softly, almost kind. "Keep your mouth shut and nothing will happen. I know where to find you if you do something stupid." Then he got out of the car and disappeared between the buildings, like the night itself swallowed him. I sat there shaking, unable to move. I couldn't say how much time passed. 10 minutes, 20, an hour. The dashboard clock read 4:17 a.m. In a few hours, campus would come back to life. Students would head out for runs. Others would grab coffee before class. And I would still be here, carrying a secret that burned in my chest. When I finally drove, I did it in absolute silence. I got to my apartment, double-locked the door, and collapsed onto the bed without even taking off my clothes. I didn't sleep for a second. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment again and again, trying to understand how a simple act of kindness had turned me into an accomplice to an armed robbery. The next morning, the local news confirmed my worst fears. The broadcast talked about the gas station robbery. The cashier had made it out unharmed, though deeply shaken. Police were looking for 2 suspects, one tall with dark hair and another shorter with light hair. They had blurry images from the outside cameras. My car appeared in one of them, pulling away from the scene. For weeks, every time I saw a patrol car, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I jumped at the smallest noise, convinced they were coming for me. Brian disappeared from campus. Some people said he'd dropped out. Others said he'd transferred. I never saw him again. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night either. I couldn't. Changing majors was the only way out. I dropped the media ethics class. I couldn't stand hearing that word without feeling nauseous. Even now, years later, when someone asks me for a ride late at night, my whole body tenses up. I always say no. Always. Because I learned, in the most brutal way possible, that sometimes trying to help the wrong person can destroy your life in ways you never imagined. Story 6. The notification popped up on my phone around 3 in the afternoon that Thursday in March. "You have a new match." I was working from home, sitting at the tiny kitchen table in my downtown Portland apartment, reviewing spreadsheets for the marketing firm where I'd been an analyst for 3 years. Living alone had gotten expensive since my last roommate moved out 2 months earlier, so I'd been trying to meet new people, maybe find someone special. Dating apps weren't exactly my favorite pastime, but at 28, with most of my friends married or living in other cities, they seemed like the most practical option. I opened the profile. Ryan, 32, software developer. He liked hiking and craft beer. In the photos, he looked like a clean-cut, smiling guy with a natural ease that's rare on those platforms. We started chatting right away, and I was surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. He asked about my job, told funny stories about debugging code at 2 in the morning, and showed genuine interest when I mentioned my hobby of photography. By that afternoon, we'd exchanged about 50 messages when he suggested dinner on Saturday at a downtown Thai restaurant called Bamboo Garden. I said yes without hesitating. My roommate, Valerie, was in the living room watching Netflix when I told her about the date. She gave me that look that mixes support and concern. "Just be careful, okay?" she said. "Maybe you could meet in a public place first. Grab coffee or something." I laughed. I explained that the restaurant was on Morrison Street, a busy area, and that we'd already talked a lot, that the guy seemed completely normal. He had even sent me his LinkedIn profile, supposedly to prove he was who he said he was. Saturday came faster than I expected. I spent the morning cleaning the apartment, trying on at least 6 outfits before settling on dark jeans and a burgundy sweater. Simple, but it made me feel confident. The restaurant was about a 15-minute walk away, and the weather was surprisingly nice for March, so I decided to walk. Ryan texted that morning to confirm the time, 7 o'clock, and even sent a screenshot of his reservation. When I walked into Bamboo Garden, the hostess asked if I was waiting for someone, and there he was, at a corner table, standing up to greet me with a smile. He looked exactly like his photos, maybe even better. A crisp navy shirt, confident but relaxed. The first hour flew by. We ordered pad thai, green curry, and shared spring rolls. We laughed at stories about disastrous first dates we'd heard, and everything seemed to click perfectly. When the check came, he insisted on paying. I offered to split it, but he smiled and said, "Next one's on you," and winked at me charmingly. When we stepped outside, the air was cool and pleasant, the kind that makes you want to keep walking. That's when he mentioned it. "There's a beautiful trail about 10 minutes from here," he said. "It runs along the river. I found it last month when I moved. Want to see it? We can walk a bit to help digest." He said it so naturally, with such a genuine smile, that it sounded like a good idea. Morrison Street was still buzzing with people heading to bars and late dinners, so it didn't feel risky. My phone buzzed with a message from Valerie. "How's the date going?" I typed quickly, "Great. Still out. I'll tell you later," and put it away without noticing the battery flashing red. The walk toward the trail pulled us gradually away from downtown noise. The lights of bars and restaurants faded behind us, replaced by quieter, unfamiliar streets. Ryan kept talking easily. He asked about my photography, whether I preferred portraits or landscapes, and even showed me sunset photos on his phone. They looked real, and that reassured me a little. When we reached the start of the trail, I noticed something. The streetlights ended right there, and the path disappeared into a darkness that seemed to swallow light. "During the day it's prettier," he said, "but at night it has its charm. You can hear the river more clearly." Something inside me hesitated, an instinctive prick that made me slow for a second. But he was already moving forward, turning back to look at me with that charming smile again. I didn't want to seem paranoid or ruin a date that had been perfect up to that point. The first stretch was pleasant. I could hear the murmur of water and see distant city lights filtering through the trees. The air smelled like damp earth and wood. We walked about 10 minutes when my phone died completely. I tried turning it on, but the screen stayed black, not even for an emergency call. I laughed, pretending it didn't bother me. "Perfect," I joked, "right when I might need it." "Don't worry," he replied with an unsettling calm. "Mine is charged." We kept walking, but something had changed. The tone of his voice, his body language, the questions. It started with harmless things, whether I had siblings, whether my parents lived nearby. Then it got more. personal. "Do you have any health problems?" he asked. I laughed nervously. "Is that something you usually ask on first dates?" He smiled, but his eyes didn't match the smile. "Just curious," he said. "Sometimes I think about those things." And then he asked the question that froze my soul. This might sound weird, but have you ever thought about what you'd want done with your stuff if something unexpected happened to you? I stopped dead. His tone was far too casual for something that macabre. He tried to soften it, saying a friend of his had died recently and it had made him reflect on life and death. But there was something in his gaze, a bright analytical coldness, that made me feel like every word was calculated. I tried to keep my composure. "That's a pretty heavy topic for a first date, don't you think?" I said, forcing a fake laugh as I stepped back. He stepped closer. The air between us tightened. His face changed. He wasn't the charming man from dinner anymore. He was someone else. His eyes shone with a hungry intensity in the pale moonlight. "I'm just curious," he repeated in a low voice. "You live alone, right? You mentioned your roommate moved out. Must be nice having all that space. Do you have good locks? A security system?" My heart was pounding so hard I felt like he could hear it. Every fiber of my body screamed run, but I knew he was taller, stronger, and I had no idea how to get back. The trail had curved so much I'd lost all sense of direction. "You know what? I don't think I feel well," I said, forcing a smile. Maybe it was the curry. "Can we go back?" But he didn't move away. He just tilted his head, studying me, like he was assessing prey. "You didn't answer my question about your stuff," he murmured. "Do you have life insurance? Valuable jewelry at home? That camera gear you mentioned must be worth a lot." And that's when I understood with absolute certainty. This wasn't a date. It never was. My mind started racing. I remembered the self-defense classes I'd taken in college, replayed every move I could use if he tried to touch me. But he was too close. And behind him, the trail split into two unfamiliar directions. I had no idea which one led back to the city. I'd walked into a trap, planned from the moment that man swiped right on me. Then something happened that wasn't part of his plan. From somewhere behind me came voices, loud laughter, stumbling footsteps, a conversation between drunk young people who seemed to be coming down the trail. There were at least 5 or 6. Ryan's face changed. For the first time, I saw annoyance, a spark of frustration in his eyes. And in that split second of distraction, I moved. I shoved him with all my strength and ran toward the voices, screaming, "Help! Please, help me!" I could hear his footsteps behind me, crushing gravel, but I didn't look back. I ran with everything I had, my heart nearly bursting out of my chest. Rounding a bend, I saw phone flashlights cutting through the darkness. A group of students appeared between the trees. I threw myself toward them, nearly colliding with a girl in a University of Portland hoodie. "That man is following me," I shouted, gasping. "Please help me." The kids regrouped instantly, stepping between him and me. One of them, big and broad, took a step forward like a wall. "Hey, man, back off, okay?" he said firmly. Ryan stopped about 3 meters away. His face had snapped back into that charming smile, the same one that had fooled me through dinner. "Guys and Rella," he said, raising his hands. "It's a misunderstanding. We're on a date. She just got scared of the dark." But I was already talking over myself, telling them everything, his questions, how he'd led me there, how he'd pushed to walk into the woods. The girl in the hoodie already had her phone out. "I'm calling 911, she announced, her voice shaking. Ryan's smile cracked for the first time. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked nervously from face to face. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. But when two of the guys stepped toward him, he turned and disappeared between the trees, swallowed by the darkness. The students stayed with me until police arrived. They walked me back to the trail entrance, where two patrol cars waited with their lights on. I told them everything: his name, his profile, the restaurant, every word. Even though deep down I already suspected none of it was real. The officers drove me home and warned me that men like that often used burner phones and fake profiles. When I walked in, Valerie was waiting up, awake. When she saw me, and she didn't have to ask anything, she came over silently, hugged me, and made tea while I told her everything, my hands shaking. We sat in silence for a long time, aware that I'd been minutes away from becoming one of those missing woman stories on the news. The days that followed were a fog of anxiety. I changed the locks, installed a security system, and deleted every dating app. A week later, the detective assigned to my case called. They hadn't found any trace of Ryan. The LinkedIn profile was fake, created just 2 days before we matched. The restaurant had footage of us eating dinner, but his face was too blurry to identify. Even the reservation had been made with a prepaid card under a name that didn't exist. It was as if the man had never existed. A ghost who materialized only long enough to execute his plan. 3 months have passed, and I still have nightmares. Sometimes I dream I'm walking that trail again, that I hear his footsteps behind me, that his voice is asking me again about my life insurance, and I wonder how many other women matched with him. How many said yes to that nighttime walk, and how many didn't make it out. The detective told me I was lucky, that those students showing up was probably the only thing that saved me. He said predators like him plan every detail, every question, every smile. Since then, I've told my story on every platform I can, hoping it serves as a warning. People always think they'd spot the signs, that they'd never fall for something like that. But Ryan seemed perfect, funny, successful, respectful, until he asked what I'd want done with my belongings if something happened to me. Now, when my friends talk about online dating, I always tell them the same thing. Meet in public, stay in public, and listen to that inner voice telling you something isn't right. Because when that voice is screaming, it might already be too late. Story 7. The day had started like any other. I'd just gotten back from the grocery store with a trunk full of things that, if I'm honest, I didn't really need. And I was halfway through organizing the pantry when I heard the pounding. It wasn't a neighbor's knock. It was fast, clumsy, desperate. The kind of pounding that doesn't ask permission. It demands attention. I live alone in a quiet duplex on the outskirts of a small town in North Carolina, where the most exciting thing that happens is when someone's dog escapes the yard. So that kind of pounding doesn't happen here. At first, I didn't open the door. I looked through the peephole and saw a guy. Couldn't have been more than his 20s, soaked in sweat. His shirt stained with a dark red. He paced back and forth like he didn't know whether to run or collapse. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He was missing one sneaker, and he kept looking over his shoulder like someone was chasing him. He knocked again, harder this time, and I heard his broken voice. "Please, sir, help me. They're going to kill me." There was something in the way he said it, the tone, the panic in every word, that stopped me cold. I knew I should call the police. That's what any sensible person would do. But he didn't look dangerous. He looked terrified. And maybe I was too curious for my own good. I unlocked the deadbolt but kept the chain on. I opened the door just a crack. "What's going on?" I asked. He started spilling disconnected phrases. Something about people chasing him, that he needed a phone, that he didn't want to die like his friend. But his eyes, they weren't moving like someone looking at the real world. They jumped from side to side, locking onto things that weren't there. I should have understood right then, but I didn't. He asked to come in. I said no. I offered to call someone, but he shook his head so fast I thought he'd snap his neck. "Not the police. Please," he begged. "Just let me catch my breath. Please." He sounded on the edge of collapse, about to fall apart on my porch, and against every warning in my head, I unhooked the chain and opened the door. He stumbled in and dropped to his knees, gasping like he'd run through fire. I shut the door and told him to sit on the couch, but he stayed on the floor, head down, rocking slightly. I tried to talk to him, asked if he was hurt, if someone was after him. His answers were broken fragments, nonsense words, names, numbers. He mentioned someone named Marcus, a van, and started whispering digits like he was reciting a code. I crouched to get a better look. That's when I noticed. The blood on his shirt wasn't fresh. In places it was dried, cracked, like it had been there for hours. His hands kept opening and closing. It didn't look like pain, more like contained tension, like he was bracing for something terrible. I offered him water. He just stared at me, unblinking too fast, like he didn't understand my words. Then, suddenly, he murmured, "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" I asked. He shot to his feet. He started pacing and pressing his fingers to his temples, muttering things I couldn't make out. That's when I reached for my phone on the counter, and in that instant, everything snapped. He lunged at me before I could touch the screen. 1 second he was across the room, and the next he had my wrist and slammed me into the refrigerator door. Magnets went flying. He wasn't yelling at me. He was yelling at someone who wasn't there. "You said you wouldn't follow me. You said we were done." His grip became unbearable, and he threw me to the floor like I weighed nothing. I felt the cold linoleum against my cheek, and all I could think was, this guy isn't scared. He's lost. I scrambled up, put the kitchen island between us, and shouted for him to calm down, that I wanted to help, but there was no one left to reason with. He started yanking open drawers, flipping chairs, screaming that there were microphones, that the walls were full of eyes. I wasn't seeing a scared kid anymore. I was seeing someone completely consumed by his own mind, and me trapped in the middle of it. I backed down the hallway, trying to keep something solid between us. But he followed, quieter now. His voice had turned into a high, trembling whisper. "They know. It's in the walls," he kept repeating as he dragged his fingers over the paint, like he could feel something pulsing behind it. Then he turned toward me. The rage was gone. All that was left was a terrifying certainty in his eyes, like he'd decided I was part of his nightmare. He charged. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the only thing near me, a lamp, and threw it with all my strength. The impact sounded like a wet crack. He stumbled, hit the wall, and dropped to the floor. I stood there frozen, shaking, not knowing if he was going to get back up. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. My voice broke as I spoke. I couldn't explain anything coherently. I just kept saying someone had gotten in, that he'd attacked me, that I didn't know who he was. I locked myself in the bathroom, listening to the silence. Every second I expected the door to explode open. The police and paramedics arrived fast. Apparently, someone a few blocks away had already reported him hours earlier for smashing a parked car and running before the patrol car arrived. He had no ID. They took him to a hospital under psychiatric custody. One of the officers told me he was probably in the middle of a meth-induced psychotic break. He probably hadn't slept in days. I gave my statement and watched them load him into the ambulance, strapped to the gurney, screaming at shadows only he could see. I changed the locks 2 days later. Since then, I don't sleep the same. Nothing like this had ever happened to me. And I made one single mistake. I let chaos in because it looked like fear. I wanted to believe I could help, but I learned that compassion without caution can cost you. Now, when someone knocks on my door, I watch longer through the peephole. I trust silence more than words. And when I hear pounding in the middle of the night, I don't open. I just listen and wait for it to stop.